Good day and welcome to Gudera's Karma Summit. This is the media panel. I'm Kevin Kajiwara, co-president of the political risk advisory business at Teneo, which is a global partner of this summit. Clearly, 2020, and it's only half over, is proving extraordinarily challenging for corporations dealing with a global pandemic, reacting to an unprecedented economic crisis comprising both supply and demand shocks, and having to strategically plan in a period of unprecedented uncertainty, also navigating the largest social movement in American history, catalyzed by the George Floyd murder. And all of this, of course, contextualized by a US presidential election. And there are the challenges then in delivering a public stand on key issues to and via a shifting media landscape. And so with media playing a key role in defining and celebrating corporate leaders and impact, we're going to discuss today how mainstream media can help shape public interest in community building and corporate engagement. And we have a superb set of panelists with a wealth of relevant experience and perspectives to help us understand all of this today. Linda Boff is the Chief Marketing and Communications Officer of GE, where she's also the Vice President, Learning and Culture. She is the President of the GE Foundation. She also co-leads the GE Women's Network. And she is one of corporate America's most influential marketing executives, named Adweek's Grand Brand Genius in 2017. Perez is the Senior Vice President and Chief Communications, Public Affairs, Sustainability, and Marketing Assets Officer for the Coca-Cola Company. Served as Coke's first Chief Sustainability Officer, leading the company's focus on water stewardship and women's economic empowerment. Has been named by CNN and others as one of the most powerful Latinas in America today. And Gillian Tett, known to many of you for her columns in the Financial Times, where she is the chief of the editorial board and editor at large for the US. She was named Columnist of the Year in the British Press Awards in 2014, and she is the co-founder of the FT's Moral Money, an initiative exploring the ongoing shift to ethical, sustainable, and responsible investing. So I think the bona fides here are well established, but the aim of this summit is to highlight the importance of doing good while also doing well. There's no greater laboratory, quite frankly, than 2020 to demonstrate how tricky striking that balance is and communicating about it effectively. So I think diving into how three of you, see things in real time right now is going to paint a really good big picture, I think. So let's start with the social issues, because I think movements like Black Lives Matter and the Me Too movement have shown that not taking a stand on such important issues is really equivalent to not supporting those issues. So maybe B and Linda, I can start with you. B, maybe you first. Do corporations and their leaders owe responsibility to their employees and their customers and to society at large to take an active stand and champion such causes to bring about change? And is it just a stand, or is it a dialogue really with internal and external stakeholders?
Thank you, Kevin. It's both in our world. And so for us, it's equally as much as having a stand as listening to people and to the key stakeholders, whether that's employees, other people who are working around the social justice issues, and really trying to understand the role we can play to drive the positive change with the perspectives that we have. We also have seen a shift. Maybe in the past, we actually had a founder who was known as Mr. Anonymous, and we would do good, but we wanted to get caught by doing good. And so if people discovered it was Mr. Woodruff, one of our key founders, and it was Coca-Cola, that was okay, but we felt uncomfortable bragging about it. And even back when Martin Luther King was being awarded the Nobel Prize in Atlanta, it was the mayor who came to Robert Woodruff and said, "We're having a really hard time selling tickets to the lunch. The business community is not buying the tickets." And Robert Woodruff very quietly went around to the other business leaders and made it very clear that Coca-Cola was not going to stay in Atlanta if the business community did not support the right social issues, and that he expected the other business leaders to step up and stand in. Well, that lunch sold out within 1 hour, 1,600 tickets, standing room only. And, fast forward to today, that same kind of approach is needed, but a more public approach in terms of your employees want to know, what do you stand for? We've seen that 66% of adults within the Ipsos studies that we look at say they expect CEOs to have a point of view and to articulate it. And so even today with the murders of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and unfortunately the list goes on in terms of the social issues and the issues that the world is facing, our employees and our consumers expected us to speak out. And we have a framework that we work within. It's listening first to our employees. We did receive some criticism because we chose to listen to our employees first and dialogue there versus make a public statement right away. We did make a public statement within a couple of days, but we wanted to have a town hall. Our CEO engaged in a town hall with the employees, shared with them some of his perspectives and the things that he was seeing, as well as some of the actions we were taking. And it was all the way down from what are the real stats within our own business? What did our numbers and representation look like? Where did we need to go on our own journey? How were we investing in everyone from the Black minority community in terms of businesses, the supplier community, to how are we thinking about places where we were not going to invest because we were going to make a point of view in terms of pausing our social media, which you've probably read a little bit about in terms of engaging and looking at policy, or advocating for the legislation around the hate crime bills. As you probably are aware, Georgia was one of the 4 states that when this happened did not have support for hate crime legislation. We were writing letters to the governors, lieutenant governor, speaker of the House, but our employees also wanted to play a role. And so by James taking the inside out approach and having a perspective as a CEO to the employees, but also listening to see what else was missing, we were able to really strengthen some of our key actions. And we also engaged a task force of employees and working with key stakeholders to help us figure out what would be the 3 to 4 things we would measure, track, and publicly report. And so we feel very strongly that it's important for our values to be known and for us to also act within those values and be transparent and public about it, which will drive that positive change and also potentially inspire others to join along in that journey, which we've seen. We know that these issues are so big and important that we do need all of corporate America to work together. And I know that, our fellow panelists here, Linda, Gillian, we know your organizations as well are really working hard in terms of social justice issues. And that's important that we all work together.
And so it sounds like at a Coke level that it's been a fairly positive experience, all things considered then. Linda, you also represent a historic and iconic corporate name in America. How are you seeing it?
Yeah, I'd say some similar themes to what you just heard be discussed, and then some differences, which is what makes a conversation like this interesting. So similar to Coca-Cola, I would say that listening, being thoughtful, being pensive, having conversations, really tough conversations. I can speak to that personally, but I think that was probably true in your leadership as well. And I would imagine Gillian the same way, talking about some things that haven't really been talked about that need to be. Our first responsibility, and thus far, I will say the one that we are, Kevin, the most focused on is our employees. So we spent the first week, even into the second week after the George Floyd murder, with different groups inside the company. GE, like many companies, has an African American forum. I think was founded nearly 30 years ago, so it's got a really nice track and history. And so we had a lot of conversations. We had a lot of one-on-one conversations, and ultimately made a series of an announcement with a series of actions. I don't think they're blow your hair back actions, because I don't think this is necessarily a moment yet where all of us understand what that needs to look like. For us, taking a very similar to how we would operate on another problem approach has been the way GE has looked at this. So we made clear that as we announced not just a new chief diversity officer at the corporate level, but at each of our business unit levels, which had never happened before, that we selected folks who were largely operators. They're not HR professionals. And the reason we did that was we wanted to have people who had accountability, and we're used to having accountability in terms of, whatever function they were previously in, supply chain, et cetera. So our intent going forward is to take the same rigor as we think about diversity, and as we think about how we can drive better representation, that we do in terms of how we run the rest of the company. So I would say thus far, we have been incredibly focused on what we can do inside to raise the tenor and the transparency of the dialogue, to put in place things that are actionable, that in the beginning, I suspect will lay the foundation for hopefully what will be some different numbers going forward and a different approach. We have not done a whole lot externally. We've done some LinkedIn posts, et cetera. So our focus thus far has been decidedly one of talking to our employees, hearing what's on their minds, and kind of acting and responding in kind.
So, of course, one of the big challenges here then is that not everyone in all of the audience, in the myriad audience that you're addressing out there is going to afford you the luxury of time. Gillian, talk about the media role here in helping, convert these movements into permanent positive changes in the fabric of our society, and what companies are doing in response, and at the same time that upholding all of these sides to account, as is the responsibility of the media. And I do also want to give you the opportunity here to talk about, the Financial Times or the media industry's own response to this. I mean, we think of them as this institution holding everybody else to account, but you've got your own responsibility to employees and public as well.
Absolutely. Well, thank you. Well, it's great to be here today and talk about this. Apologies for talking from what looks like a park. Like many people who are watching this know, we've all got internet challenges these days, and so I've had to come to this spot to try and get internet connection to work. Couple of points. Firstly, I have just spent, before I'm talking to you, the last hour with the senior FT management having a seminar to talk about essentially racial issues, diversity issues, and how we tackle this, because the media absolutely reflects the challenges as an institution that other companies, be that Coke or GE, are grappling with. Because the tragedy is there are very, very few African-American business journalists, or frankly, leading journalists at all, actually acting as not just an analyst of the news, but also as somebody who's talking about it and essentially doing what needs to be done so desperately right now, which is reflecting the society that we're trying to write about. So we're absolutely committed about how we actually address that. Now, the other point I'd like to make is that we are also, as a newspaper or as a media group that's covering the way that companies and other institutions define themselves, keenly aware that there is a big zeitgeist shift going on right now. And I first spotted that a couple of years ago, and I persuaded my colleagues to create a platform called Moral Money. Some of you may have seen this already. It's basically the first platform at the Financial Times or any mainstream media group which is focused on sustainability, corporate purpose, environmental, social governance issues. And I have to be honest that when I went around the FT a year and a half ago saying, there's nothing in the market doing this, in the mainstream media, we should do it, there were a lot of my colleagues who kind of went, oh, it doesn't sound like really hard news. It's a bit hippy-dippy. It's a bit the kind of stuff that PRs want to talk about. Someone said, ESG stands for eye roll, sneer, and groan. It's all this kind of greenwashing, reputation washing, stuff like that. But I was very convinced that there actually was a demand for that kind of information. So we got the platform going a year ago, and I'm delighted to say it's become one of our fastest growing and most successful new products we've ever had. So that's good. But actually, that's really about the fact that we have reflected a shifting zeitgeist out there in the market. Because actually, even at the FT, or even especially among FT readers, There are people inside the C-suite, the CIO committees, inside the business schools saying, actually, the zeitgeist is changing. And what is really interesting is that having launched this in June last year, I hired a team to do it. When COVID hit in March, there was part of me that was saying, maybe we got the timing all wrong. Maybe this is going to knock everything track. And as we sit here now in July, the opposite is true. What we saw was initially a huge wave of distraction, then an explosion of people focusing on the S factor, the social factors, including issues like Black Lives Matter. What we've seen in literally the last week, and we're actually writing the newsletter as we speak, is another explosion in the E factor, the environment, but increasingly people saying you have to look at that together, because we're really entering an age where as the C-suite can't have tunnel vision anymore and just think about narrow definitions of shareholder interest. We have to take a wider stakeholder vision, lateral vision, which includes so many of the issues that you're talking about right now.
Yeah, I want to pick up on that. That's really interesting because and go back to you, B, and Linda. You know, the COVID-19 crisis is going to alter people's preferences. It's going to alter people's mindsets, perhaps permanently, where we don't know yet. But I mean, it certainly feels like it's possible, including what they expect from large organizations, including what they expect from those organizations' leaderships in terms of social responsibility and associating with good causes, obviously. So how important is it for leaders to lead the way in giving their organizations a humane, personality, both internal facing to employees and external facing to consumers? And I would go beyond just employees and also say attracting that next generation of talent for whom this is an importance, has risen in a level of importance like we've never seen before. Linda?
Yeah, I have to, Kevin, sort of go back in some ways to, sort of the mission of GE, which is, as I think we've talked about before, a company and a employee base that believes deeply in the impact we have in the world. And we're not singular. Many companies do terrific things. Two of them are on the hook here with me. But every single day we kind of get up and think about healthcare and bringing healthcare to remote parts of the world, bringing people to destinations safely, bringing energy to parts of the world that doesn't have it. So being mission driven, and I know that's not specifically your question, to me relates very much to sort of this social conscience. COVID, in some ways changed everything. And I would say it changed from the very individual, how we relate to each other with greater empathy, how we appreciate the different situations our colleagues and our peers and our teams and our bosses are in. And it's a funny thing how a dog barking in the background or having somebody on your team who's at home juggling a couple kids when school's not in session just changes your outlook. And, speaking personally, I never liked working from home. I liked the professionalism, you could call it rigidity, depending on what end of the spectrum you want to be on, of an office. And it's made me a more empathetic leader in many ways. But getting more specifically into your question, I feel like, the old cartoon about the Grinch and Christmas and his heart grew 3 sizes too big or something like that. Sorry, Dr. Seuss. I feel like people's hearts have grown. And I see that. And is it always true? Is it true every day? I can't speak to whether it's true every day. But in instance after instance, beautiful things happen. So an example that I love is, at GE Healthcare, we have a very small ventilator business, very small. And, it was rediscovered in many ways during recent months, and, doubled our shifts and then doubled them again and went 24/7 as you would hope and expect we would. And, we had people who weren't working in that business, who weren't in factory production, leaving their jobs, leaving their vacations and driving cross country to take a shift, to help. And I think there's, on days when I'm feeling positive, and this panel's giving me a lot of positive juice, I see things that are unexpected, that I hope stay with us for a long period to come. This collective harnessing of we'll do what it takes. In our foundation, which you mentioned, I look after, not just grants to, some larger organizations, but going deeply into small communities and saying, what can we do? How can we help? An employee relief fund that we set up. So I don't want to monopolize, I'll pass it on, but I'm seeing a goodness emerge that I dearly hope we hold on to post-COVID.
Yeah, I agree with you. The hearts are getting bigger because, but here in New York, everybody's yelling at each other on the streets again. So maybe that's just, we've got to the new normal. But B, I want to hear your views on this, but also, you made the point at the outset here about, there was a time when leadership of the company would maybe very quietly try to implore their peers and others in the community to do the right thing. Now it's a sort of a different era.
It is, and I'll tie a few things together. What Linda was talking about is I actually believe that, everyone has always, put their heart into their work, and now they just feel more comfortable showing it. There's that permission in that space. And I'd also say that if I just empathize with Gillian for a moment, I can relate to some of the comments you got a year ago when you were trying to launch your initiatives around ESG, because imagine in 2011, when I was asked to be the company's first chief sustainability officer, almost no one had this position. It was definitely not in the C-suite in most places. And it was controversial. I was in the business. I was the chief marketing officer of our North American business. Before that, I'd run a P&L in our field organization. And I had a lot of personal friends, not in the company, but a lot of personal friends tell me, have you lost your mind? This is going to be something that your company does for a while, but that's not something that companies are serious about. And I remember looking at a lot of the consumer research, and it was just emerging. And I think you're right that it's in the zeitgeist now, and things have accelerated over this last year. I used to also say that when the investors start asking the questions, that's when we know business will become even more serious and institutionalize this kind of work. And so I'm proud to look at Coke's 133-year journey and say it's always been a part of our mission and vision and the work we do. I feel now we have the permission to really talk about it in terms of the business and growth, because people expect this from companies. They want to make their purchase decisions, and we see this in all different forms of data, with brands that are supporting their values and that they can believe in. And I believe that the consumer and people will continue to make their decisions with their wallets based on whether or not a company truly exhibits the actions against the purpose and the values or not. And so I feel that it's really important now in times of COVID, where everyone is starting to rethink businesses and looking at what's taking place, that people are put at the center, as well as the resources we use, and how can we help communities become more resilient and thrive as we all look to emerge stronger on the other side. And the role that business can play has to actually be more overt and out front and transparent. And there has to be the tension in terms of holding business accountable at the same time. So the more public you become, as you all know, the more attention there is in the system, and the more eyes are on you really delivering the work you say you're going to deliver. And part of this for us a couple years ago, when I started to work on sustainability, what surprised me is that accounting firms always assured the data on the financial side of a business, but rarely did they assure data on sustainability. And as a business person coming out of the business, I thought that was a little strange. And I said, well, how are we reporting on all of this data if there isn't a true financial accounting company looking at it? There were NGOs, but there were not truly independent resources. And it was about 2013 when E&Y agreed to go on the journey with us and help us make sure we were looking at common definitions, measurements. We were rolling this into objectives. We were then becoming transparent, and then they would assure the data. And today they assure the data. We've combined our business and sustainability reports. And at the same time, we've looked at where can we continue to improve. And so we're transparent on where we're making progress. We're equally transparent on where we still need to improve and what needs to be done differently. And I believe that this will continue to be expected. I hear that, now through the pandemic and with the social justice issues, I can tell you that, we're very busy with requests from investor meetings. We're very busy with requests in terms of how are we progressing. The next evolution of this is how do you roll these metrics into compensation, because that'll drive the behavior. And while we already have it in our short-term compensation, we're very public about, we're starting to look at the long-term compensation. As a matter of fact, just in our recent board meeting here in July, we had this discussion with the board because the board of directors are also paying attention. And so I believe that the companies that emerge stronger on the other side of the pandemic are the ones who will take ESG, or whatever you want to call it, sustainability, or frankly, helping society continue to emerge stronger as well, will be the companies that actually emerge stronger on the other side, that will be supported by communities, because they'll be a part of helping the community thrive, not just helping themselves. And it's not, we have to do this together. We can't do these things on our own. And we have to support people, and we have to help the communities. Otherwise, we won't be in business.
And you bring up this point that the direction of travel is clear, and the taxonomy and the sort of standards around all of this continue to be refined. Gillian, you've written extensively about this, and had a column even in the main paper just a week or so ago about corporate and market performance reflecting these virtues that Bea and Linda are just talking about right now.
Absolutely. I mean, one of the things that we're seeing is that increasingly investors are saying you don't have to sacrifice to invest according to ESG principles. If anything, in the current environment, it's something of a safe harbor. We have just found a survey, which we're trying to highlight in Moral Money this week, showing the safe harbor point. And one of the things, by the way, we're trying to do at Moral Money is write about the stories that are coming through, publicize data, and publicize, if you like, some of the key terminology, and play a pedagogic role, because there's a desperate hunger amongst FT readers right now for information. And we have got levels of engagement we've never seen before for a newsletter, because people read it and then pass it on to colleagues, it seems, because they're trying to actually just get to speed with this information. This phase won't last that long, but at the moment there's hunger for information. So we're trying to publicize things like this very interesting investment data, which flies in the face of what most FT readers would have assumed. And we're also trying to show people that what's really going on is, in some ways, the widest possible sense of impact investing. People think impact investing is basically a very narrow niche, but I always say all that impact investing is people who are thinking about the impact of what they're doing, whether it's got a good impact or bad impact, because all investing has an impact. The question is, do you think about that impact, and do you actually try and track it or not? And what has changed is that people are now thinking about that impact. And it's really a shift from tunnel vision to lateral vision, which I don't think is going to go away anytime soon. One other thing I'd say is, to me, the other big difference with ESG today is that it's no longer just an activist tool, it's a risk management tool. And COVID has reinforced that, because when you look at how supply chain issues have played out in particular, it's very clear that having that lateral vision of your supply chains and your entire company operations gives you a sense of perspective and resilience, which people really need in these COVID times.
I would like, Gillian, if you could, for just a moment, to put on your sort of broader media hat for a second, because what you're talking about, obviously the FT has a particular type of a readership and audience, and institutional investors know how to interpret the data and the metrics and the like. But a lot of these stories that Bea and Linda are talking about, whether it's the employees and they're imploring the Georgia legislature, or employees driving across the state lines to go and work a ventilator shift, that's a story that's important to get to beyond an institutional investor audience. And how, how should companies effectively tell these kind of everyday hero type stories? I mean, I know B is very familiar with some of the ways you could do this. Would be the kind of advertisements that a Coca-Cola runs during the Olympics, or during a Super Bowl or something like that. But I mean, how do you engage the broader media ecosystem to get this story across in such a way that is going to reflect the bigger picture of the company and its mission?
Well, that's a very good question, because the reality is that one of the things that sells newspapers or sells media or grabs attention is bad news. And trying to grab attention with good news, frankly, has historically been a lot harder. So journalists are essentially trained to be cynics and skeptics, quite rightly so. We have to challenge power, tell truth to power, and be, questioning and pin companies and other institutions down. But the other thing is that we live in times of such extraordinary flux that I think there is interest in looking at how different companies and individuals are trying to manage this time of flux. And at the end of the day, people always like real life human stories. And real life human stories in any form are compelling. And so I think that in many ways, what needs to happen right now is that companies need to actually become a lot more open. They need to become aware that even if they think that they can control the news flow in a hierarchical top-down way, they can't. All the surveys show that actually lateral forms of communication are very, very influential in people's perception of companies. And in a sense, they need to trust their employees more to talk to journalists without banks and banks of PR officials, mediating every single step and trying to control them and shut them up in case they say something wrong. And just make themselves more transparent, because the reality is in today's world of social media that, if a company is trying to change its culture and do things which are positive, and I salute all the companies that are doing that. I know there's plenty of greenwashing, there's reputation washing, there's woke washing, my favorite word, although my teenage daughter says that's so 20th century, woke washing. But, there are companies doing that, but there are also some really good things going on which need to be communicated. And in a sense, companies should trust their employees to tell those stories, because believe me, it will be a more compelling story usually than sitting talking to yet another CEO.
Well, Gillian brought up the younger generation, and they are, and they've demonstrated, particularly through Black Lives Matter, that they're looking to actively engage in conversations that impact, the broader society, and to stay relevant. As Gillian suggests, it's no longer just PR value for brands to support the odd good cause, but increasingly it's becoming important to weave into the sort of the core brand ethos, if you will. So, B and Linda, how are big brands, big companies thinking about the communications and marketing strategy going forward in this context? And I think what's interesting here is that B, you represent a very consumer-facing company, and Linda, an iconic company, but maybe in today's world, the end user consumer has less of a direct touch. So it'd be interesting to hear your differing perspectives on that. B?
So, it's interesting because when I first came into this role, on sustainability, I had come out of marketing and field operations. And I remember I thought, oh, this will be easy to tell our story. We do so many great things. And boy, was I wrong. And Gillian was right in terms of people want to hear from the people who are doing the work. And so we had some stops and starts in how we told the stories. And what we realized is, and so part of it, we wanted to feature the stories on our social media and through our websites. We said, you know what, instead of scripting people, let's just get out there and have them talk to their phones and tell the story of the work they're doing. And all of a sudden, the stories that emerged produced so much content, and all of a sudden we put it out there. And it was, it felt like a commercial campaign, but it didn't feel like a commercial campaign, because it was actually, Paul Bowden, who's our water specialist, telling the work of the Rio Grande, or this lady, Regina, that I actually had the benefit of meeting, who's a recycler in Brazil, in one of the favelas. When I first met her, she was recycling all of the waste in a favela. It was not a great situation. She was part of our Women's Economic Empowerment Program. She got training and tools. Her business today employs over 700 people. When she told that story, people paid attention and wanted to learn more. And that's because that was Regina's story. Coca-Cola just happened to be the vehicle in which she told it. And so even today, fast forward to today, what I found fascinating, once again, it was just a reminder, people want the story from the real people doing the work, is at Georgia Tech, which is right across the street from the Coca-Cola headquarters, some engineering students had an idea. Well, we want to provide the local hospitals with face shields. We have the technology to do it, but we need some of the materials. So they called Coca-Cola because we have a great relationship with them and we're right across the street. And it was the people who brought over the materials to help the students create the face shields to then go and deliver it were the ones that actually spoke to the media. And all of a sudden it made all sorts of newspapers, not just in Atlanta, but all over the United States. And it was this moment of pride, but it was also this moment of, you know what, when you put the real people telling the real stories, you actually get to hear the struggles they went through to get the work done, but also the benefit and the beauty of how they actually were able to deliver for the community. So it's not easy, but I do think that it's important for us to all work really hard to make sure that we're profiling the heroes in our businesses and the people who are getting out there and rolling up their sleeves. And this younger generation wants to be a part of this. They are a part of it. They're the ones who are actually driving businesses to be better by inserting their points of views. And so I'm sure, Linda, you have many stories like this as well. But really showcasing the heroes, but letting them talk directly to the media and tell the story. And we have found that that's been a huge benefit.
Yeah, be such good example. And again, for two companies that are different in so many ways, some similarities. I would say that, these days GE really is an industrial company. Appliances and lighting now belong to other companies, although they bear our logo and name. So much of what we do in jet engines and heavy duty gas turbines and MRIs is kind of invisible in plain sight, right? You really want us to be there, trust me, but it's not us screaming it necessarily. It's the behind the scenes. And I'd say in marketing and communications, a lot of our strategy, and this is long pre-COVID, is pull that curtain back and allow people to see this firsthand, because the interestingness of this appeals to people. Now, it doesn't necessarily appeal to everybody, but there's a nerdiness, if you will, if you love science and technology, that really we have found great appeal for. So just to throw a few examples out and make it real, last year we turned over our social media channels to our employees, not every day, not every hour of every day, but just as a way for it not to be coming from GE, but for it to be coming from somebody who is working in Greenville, South Carolina, or Milwaukee, or Munich. Similarly, a couple years ago, when drones were kind of the rage, when they were beginning to be the rage, we had drones just shooting footage of our factories, and we had kind of, I don't know, Gillian, if this is such a dated term, like cub reporters, stringers, and they were the ones, okay, good, thank you. I really don't want to screw that up in front of you. And they were the ones reporting on what was going on in a factory. So I heartily believe that humanity, particularly when you have big companies, it's hard to get cozy with a big company, right? You might like the products. I love Bee's products. But, the face of a company is often local, individual, might be customer service, depending on, how you interact. It might be somebody over a counter if it's quick service. So I think that's true. I'll just make one more comment off of something Gillian said. Look, this is, I don't envy the media. I've never been on the media side. I think it is really important to tell the tough stories and hold all of our feet to the fire collectively. We absolutely need that. And at the same time, there are moments, particularly these days, where the breath of fresh air that comes from that individual who's doing something that, I guess it is that human interest story, really can captivate and motivate people. But I think I think for the FTs and the Gillian Tetts of the world, you know, it has to be both, right?
Can I jump in here, Kevin, and say two things. Firstly, we absolutely have to scrutinize ESG at the moment to the max, because the sector will not become credible or mature or do all the things it needs to do unless there is proper scrutiny. And we actually have a special section in Moral Money called Grit in the Oyster, where we try and look at areas where, you know, things aren't quite working out as promised or advertised or necessarily planned. And it's called Grit in the Oyster partly because you need to have that grit revealed to actually create an oyster at the end. So I think tough scrutiny is needed, and there's probably not enough scrutiny of ESG at the moment. And anyone involved in that shouldn't shy away from that. They should welcome it. But the second point is, I do think there is a strong interest, not just in human interest stories right now, but in stories with demonstration effect, because we live in such incredibly confused, so much fluctuation. By the way, apologies for yet another background. I'm literally walking around the place I am to try and find the least bad internet connection. So apologies for that. We all have to adapt to this new world. But people are desperate for demonstration effect, for basically answers, ideas, solutions, however half-formed they may be. And what you learn as a journalist is telling a policy story through a person is always the most powerful. There is a reason why there are parables in the Bible, why the Hollywood biopics always have people. It's because actually people communicate ideas most effectively. And I think if we are living in a time of zeitgeist shift, if the employees are part of that, it's absolutely right to be trying to get them to tell the story.
Well, Gillian, if you want to sell that house, we can use this video to market it, certainly. But I'm very conscious of the time. But I want to ask Bea and Linda something really quickly, because it picks up on the scrutiny that Gillian's talking about, and that's obviously so critical. But at the same time, how challenging is it for you at this time, talking about all of the things that we have just been discussing, but in an environment where, you know, we're living in highly politicized times. Your audience, whether it be internal or external, represents the absolute spectrum of the political spectrum in this country, and the dynamic between the United States and its trading partners and erstwhile allies and competitors around the world is in flux. You are both global companies, and these messages are going to be received, you know, regardless of who your intended audience is in those markets. How do you calibrate all of that?
I mean, I'm happy to jump in first, because you can't politicize these issues. These are human issues. And so you have to look at, does your company really believe in doing what's right by its values, or are you doing it just because it's a political statement? If it's just a political statement, then you shouldn't be doing it. And so for us, it was really looking at, do we stand by these decisions we're making, and are we truly addressing the needs of the business? And I love what Gillian was talking about, which is the scrutiny. It's really important. It's important because we don't have all of the answers, but the more people we bring into the conversation, the better the direction will be. And also, if we stumble and have to pivot, then we can pivot, but at least we're doing it together with others, and we're doing it for the right reasons with the right intent. And we're willing to be honest and open about where we need to pivot if we make a mistake. And I really believe that that's important, because today, you know, a lot of people, you know, will get caught up into the political dynamics that are going on. We operate, not dissimilar to Linda's company, in over 200 countries. And we're dealing with different cultures, different dynamics. When we talk about social justice, yes, here in the US, we were talking about the social justice issues as it relates to the Black community. We also have to address the social justice issues as it relates to other populations in other countries that are dealing with similar situations. So if we're going to advocate here in the United States for a hate crime bill to be passed, we have to be willing to stand up for people in other countries as well and support them. And so we can't just do it because it happens to be the discussion of the moment in one particular place. We have to do it because we're grounded in the values. And then we have to be open and honest with ourselves. It was really interesting what we saw with our employees when we engaged in the conversations. is they felt that we had not given them yet a role themselves to actually help to advocate. And they said, we want to help, but we also know that we have all these policies, back to what Gillian was saying, in terms of social media. And so are we allowed or not allowed to post on our social media feeds? And we're, it almost caught us for a moment, like, of course you're allowed freedom of speech. Of course you have the right to say your point of views and to advocate. And what we found was over 200 employees self-organized a march to the Capitol here in Georgia. And they self-organized the march. That we made the space to make sure they could take the time from work to go and do it. And also we made sure they had a place to park, because it was not a company organized march. They organized it, but we also wanted them to be safe. We provided water and masks for whatever they needed. And it was really interesting because they marched twice. And the second time that they marched was the day that it was being signed into law. And after it was signed into law, it was the legislators who came out to address the folks who had been marching. There's a self-organized march, and the march grew from over 200 to a lot more in terms of the Coca-Cola people who showed up. And it was really interesting because it was that simple act of the partnership with the employees and allowing them to express their points of views, but also doing it together, I believe really helped move this discussion into law, but also enabled us in other states to have the same kind of dialogue, to be able to drive that same approach. And the employees felt really good about it because they said, okay, well, Coke really does believe in this, and they're allowing me to actually have this point of view, and they're supporting me with it. And so, some of the debates we've had internally are not easy. There are people who will point out the things we've done wrong, and just, I'll point one out myself. 20 years ago, you're probably aware that we were in one of the largest lawsuits by Black employees that happened in corporate America. We thought we'd been on the right track, and then all of a sudden we had this moment of time where we had to self-reflect and determine, were we really on the right track and doing the right things? And we ended up having to pause and reflect and actually readjust and rebase our business and how we hire, how we interview. And today, it's actually why we're in a much better position in terms of representing the population within our business. We have over 19% African-American employees within our business and leadership. You might have read, even just this week, we appointed our new general counsel, Bradley, who's an African-American male. And that was already in the works for months. That wasn't just because of the social issue. It's because we'd already been on the path of moving in this direction in terms of diversity at the senior leadership roles, but also within the pipeline. And so it's important for us to, as we are having these discussions, back to all of what we said, is do it from a place of values, but also not be afraid to highlight when you make mistakes. But when you make that mistake, how you correct it is going to matter. And so if you're aware and you made the mistake, you have to fix it and you have to get back on track. And I believe that that's what's really important, is to lean into the value structure of the business and to truly live the actions of your purpose and mission.
Your example of the march on the State House is a perfect segue into my last question, and that is that that is that Gudera's founding principle is really about the importance of volunteerism and bringing together those in need with those who've got the supply, and you guys have got the supply and very willing supply from the sound of it. So Gudera believes that there's vast potential to make volunteering easy, fun, and satisfying, and in the process can make it a transformational movement globally. And I think you've probably already answered this question, but maybe Linda, B just gave a comprehensive response there. Maybe I'll give you the last chance here on this front. But as corporate leaders, as a corporate leader, what is your thought with regards to such a transformation? And beyond the walls of GE itself, and what's going to be needed to make that happen?
Yeah, I think people are eager to step forward and help. I was going to give you a within the walls example.
You can do that too.
It may very, very quickly. In the early part of this year, a group of us took some salary cuts, which is absolutely was warranted given the challenges we faced in our aerospace, everybody's faced in aerospace, and we used those to create an employee relief fund. And the idea here was, rather than, a few bucks going to the bottom line, let's share them amongst folks who are in real need. And so I sort of was in charge of this, or at least getting it going. And it truly was a volunteer army in every sense of the word. So we created really quickly an employee relief fund. And I say that as though you just like snap your fingers. It's actually really hard to do, and to do equity and to make sure that it's going to the right people and all the rest of it. And I had a group of, 20 people or so who had very busy day jobs, who just jumped through hoops to make this happen. Then we opened it up to folks around the company. People started, just donating money. I mean, we're going to give out thousands of grants to people who've been impacted by COVID. And, look, this isn't, I promise, it's not front page FT news. It's just goodness. And it wouldn't happen in this, and it doesn't need to be front page news. That's not even the point of the story. It's sort of the kindness of strangers, right? It's people seeing, there's folks in need. How do we help there? And sort of creating that. And I think that this moment, whether it's inside GE or FT or Coca-Cola or other companies, the level of activity that I'm seeing, particularly amongst our younger employees, the younger people in my house, my two 20-year-olds, who are just so eager to step into this moment and feel, Kevin, as though they have real power to do it, that there are things that are actually happening and that they are part of that. I don't think any of us were around for the 60s and what that felt like, but it feels like this moment that the history books will write about later on, where the speed of change in a particular moment is so accelerated. And I think as a result, the opportunity to be part of that, to volunteer in whatever that looks like, is something that people are leaping toward. And maybe they realize that this is a fleeting moment. Who knows? It has a specialness to it, despite all the challenges.
Yeah. Well, we are up against the clock, which is a really harsh taskmaster, I'm afraid. But I want to conclude by asking each of you to do something that that all of your fellow panelists on the other panels over these 2 days are doing, because volunteerism, again, is so important to the theme of this summit and to and Gudera's raison d'etre, if you will, and that is to ask you, in this era of transforming globally volunteerism, what are the 3 words that come to your mind when you think about volunteering? B, let me start with you.
Yeah, I'd say purpose, because you have to have a purpose as to why you're doing it and what you're standing for. So purpose, inclusion, because the more people who get involved, the better it'll be. And opportunity, because this will be an opportunity to enrich and develop yourself, as well as to help others become more resilient and get to the other side. So purpose, inclusion, and opportunity.
Linda?
Partnership, really hard to get there by yourself. Agility. And then finally, impact. I think that this is about what will be hopefully very lasting.
And Gillian, you and your peers are going to hold them to account. So what are your 3 words when you come to it? I think we lost you there.
Yeah? How's that?
Now I can hear you.
Okay. Empathy, to try and see the world through other people's eyes, which can help you not just become more tolerant, but then to learn self-examination through the process of volunteering. And through that, to think about blind spots, because part of the job of volunteering is to try and see the world afresh and to help other people.
Great. Well, thank you all. The time has gone by very quickly. Frankly, we've only really gotten to scratch the surface. But B. Perez, Linda Boff, and Gillian Tett, on behalf of Gudera, I want to thank you all for your participation, and to wish everyone who is attending the conference a great summit, and hope you enjoy and learned as much as I did on this panel. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Kevin. Thank you.
Thanks, Kevin.